that word estimate, I just want to remind you how imperfect it is. Estimated quarterly taxes are a place where simply meeting the deadline every quarter and paying something is going to prevent 4 penalties from building up on next year's tax return and save you money, even if you get it very wrong. So an attempt that is radically off is still better than freezing and doing nothing, letting perfectionism completely stop you. Welcome to the Sunlight Podcast. In this show, we're talking about taxes, money, and careers for creative people who have a big vision for changing the world with their work. I'm your host, Hannah Cole, artist, tax pro, and the founder of Sunlight Tax. If you're an artist, designer, or creative entrepreneur who wants to grow your business sustainably, manage your taxes, and build a stash of fuck you money so you can control your own time and have a bigger impact with your work, you are in the right place. Hello, welcome. Today I want to talk about perfectionism. This is something that it's just so important for creative people to have an understanding of how perfectionism may be holding us back. And I'm going to tie it into taxes, as funny as that sounds, but it really does have a relationship with your taxes and how you manage your money and how you focus your time. So when you're a creative person, the fact is that creative people don't go into creative fields in general because of money. I'm not here to judge you if you do. That's great. I actually think all of us should be, earning more, charging more. I want that for you. I want you to make a really great living from your incredible work. But most of us, when we go into a creative field, our motivation is about the work itself. It's about being creative, about putting something out in the world that's wonderful, that speaks to people. And, it's about making your best possible work. And so I think that when we feel that way, when you feel that you want your work to be as good as it possibly can be at all times, perfectionism can really play a role there. And of course, I want your work to be excellent. We all do. But it can have some repercussions in other parts of your life. So I just want to kind of illustrate with a couple of examples. When I had a moment in life as a project manager at an interactive design agency in New York City, and I loved it. It was such a fun job. I really, really enjoyed it. And part of what I loved was that the creative team was so talented. They were doing such skillful and interesting work. If you're not familiar with interactive design, that is doing the design work around how apps and websites function, how a user interacts with a website, with something on like a program on a tablet, things like that. So it's quite technical, but also really takes a lot of human empathy and understanding to see how a person understands a website and navigates through it, how they find information they need to get to, etc. So I was new to project management at the time that I had this job, and I would talk to a lot of other project managers. I actually did quite a bit of training outside of work hours because I loved this job and I wanted to be really good at it. And a lot of other project managers would say stuff like, ugh, the creatives, ugh, the creative team. They would speak in this really derogatory way about working with creative people. And they were like, they're always behind on timeline. They're always behind on budget. It's really hard to communicate the things that, to the project manager are your set of priorities. Let's think for a minute from the angle of the creative team. Well, if you're a creative person working at an agency, you're going to be paid one way or the other, whether that project is on time or not, on budget or not. But ultimately, your name is going to be on your work. Right. And you want that work to sing. You want it to reflect that what you do is really freaking good. And so it matters much more to you that the work is incredible than that it is done exactly on the date it was supposed to be done. Right. So I totally personally in project management, I think you really have to have an understanding of the balance of these things and a respect for the desire of the creative team to do such good work, which frankly is really important to the company ultimately in building a reputation and a track record and actually delivering amazing work. So perfectionism is really easy to exist in that space. I will tell you a little bit about, and I'm going to also say, like, if you're a fine artist, musician, etc., like, I don't know a single artist who faced with the choice of like, I could, paint this show that I have coming up. I could do it with just paint and material that's already in my studio, or I could go and buy this absolute top of the line paint that does this special thing that's going to look incredible. And I'm going to completely blow my budget by getting it, but the work will be amazing. I really don't know any artist in the world who is going to make the choice about having their profit and loss statement look better versus their work, right? This is a little unfortunate when it comes to doing your taxes because it does have a repercussion on that side. But most artists really want to make amazing work, right? So we tend to make those choices, and that's okay, right? It's okay. In my own life, before being an artist or a project manager, way back in high school, I learned perfectionism pretty early because I wanted to go to Yale. I grew up in what it was at the time, a sort of small, homogenous town outside of Boston. And I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I had no interest. I was not a person who was kind of cool or particularly valued in my town. I was not a cheerleader. I was not athletic. I was smart and weird. And like, that wasn't cool where I grew up. And I was so excited to just be able to get to a place where there were a lot of smart people around and we're being weird and eccentric and authentic, frankly, and being loved for being yourself was something that was good. And so my strategy was I just decided to set my sights on Yale. I was like, I'm going to go to Yale. That's my ticket out of here. That's how I can be among smart people who are creative. And it'll be a place where I can be sort of seen for the person that I am. Well, P.S. to any of you, if there's any high schoolers listening, this is not a good strategy. There are a whole lot of people who could get into Yale who don't, right? Because just the numbers are not in your favor. So this is not a very wise thing to do, actually. And also to those of you who don't know the Ivy League, Yale is the artsy one. Yale is the one where they have the best school of art and the best school of drama. It is like, it's where the artists go, or it's a great place to be a creative person, I'll say. Anyway, so in high school, I had my vision absolutely locked in. I was going to go to Yale come hell or high water, and I worked my ass off. I mean, I would like pretend to my parents that I was going to bed, and I would set my alarm for an hour later, and I'd wake up, go back to my desk, and keep doing homework for another 2 hours. I mean, I was a crazy person. And well, cut to the chase, I did actually get in and I did go to Yale. So in my case, I did get lucky. I mean, a lot of it was not luck, but it is still luck because getting into a school like that is still a crapshoot. Anyway, so in order to kind of have my sights on a thing like that, I was a real perfectionist. I like would complete every single assignment. I would always want to be sort of as good as I possibly could be in every subject, et cetera, et cetera. So this was kind of like deep in my bones. And let me just tell you that the world does reward you for this behavior. If you want to work your ass off in high school and get really, really good grades, have a great portfolio, like be in competitive orchestras, there's a lot of people very happy to pat you on the back and say, good job, keep going, which is not necessarily the healthiest message to be sending to a teenager. So anyway, these things are deeply ingrained in my upbringing. I will give some credit to my mom here, who used to sit me down and say, Hannah, you don't have to work this hard. I got C's all through high school and I did fine. So don't think this was coming from my parents. It was not. But one thing, I want to be sensitive in the way that I say this, but there was a real emotional component to my perfectionism growing up, which was, and I say this with a lot of empathy, but my father had a very stressful job. He was a partner at an architecture firm. He's an architect still to this day. And as any of you who are architects know, or if you know that world, architecture can be very stressful, especially at the partner level, because pretty much anytime the economy tanks, the firm has to lay people off. I mean, architecture is, as my father used to say, the canary in the coal mine for a bad economy. And so, as a partner, he very often was in the position of having to lay off people who were really good and he loved and had been doing great work simply for economic reasons. And so, as you can imagine, that's a pretty awful, stressful position to be in. And this happened a lot. So, he was carrying a lot on his shoulders. I'm a business owner now, and I now run a very big payroll, and I see how stressful it is when payroll is going to come out of your bank account, whether you make sales or not. And so I have so much empathy for the kind of stress that he was holding. But, he would, he's a product of his era. And he would yell at me. He would yell. He would get really grouchy and sort of take out his emotions on the kids a little bit. Dad, if you're listening, I love you and I totally understand. But I thought as a kid in my teenage brain, I just thought, well, if I'm perfect, he won't yell at me. And so that was actually like a coping mechanism for this like more emotional, deep level thing that, no one could find fault in me if I was just perfect to begin with. I would preempt any criticism by being perfect. I'm so lucky I didn't develop an eating disorder. I know so many people who did from that particular cocktail of ingredients, but that many, many difficult situations can arise from that. For me, luckily, it was mostly just driving myself into the ground from work that was so intense that it made me almost have a nervous breakdown. Anyway, it's a lot of emotion, a lot of it's a really kind of tender thing to talk about here. But I know a lot of you are like, wait, how's she going to bring this back to taxes? Here I come. I'm going to land the plane. So I just want to kind of give you a moment of grace and empathy and just reflect back to you that there are many different reasons that perfectionism can exist in your life, good and bad. It can have good consequences and terrible ones, but that it's not necessarily your friend. And there's some areas where it is so important to let it go. Perfectionism, if I'm even going to go onto a societal level, I think perfectionism really is a tool of the patriarchy. And it's also a tool of racism. And I will illustrate those controversial statements. How many times have you heard some female political candidate have all of the policy proposals absolutely lined up? She's done all her homework. She's done her research, blah, blah, blah. And the critique is about how she looks, right? We ignore all her hard work and just talk about some little element of her that's off, right? And men are simply not held to those standards. So perfectionism is a way of dismissing her work and making it about something irrelevant, right? In terms of racism, certainly how many times have you pay attention the next time on the news, some Black person is mistreated by a police officer, shot and killed or something. And when you hear some pundit on TV, I guarantee someone is going to say, oh, well, he was playing his music awfully loud. Some stupid comment like that, right? In other words, we're going to ignore the fact that somebody lost their life for the wrong reasons in a completely unjust way. And we're going to talk about the fact that they were not an absolutely perfect person. Maybe they were jaywalking. Maybe they had even committed a crime. Nobody deserves to die without a, trial at the hands of police on the sidewalk, but they maybe did something wrong in their life. So, anyway, these are ways that perfectionism can really, I think, make those of us who aren't the dominant group in society focus on the wrong things, be distracted, have way more work to do than people who aren't going to get called out for, if their hair was done or not. So, okay, how are we going to land this plane, bring this back to taxes? Well, what I want to tell you is that a lot of you get really, really stressed when it comes to doing your taxes with good reason. I understand it. It feels stressful. And I think, especially if you're a person who's making decisions all year long that are not about money, but that are about doing the best work, that can actually have an impact on your bottom line. And it can be very unpleasant and painful to look at those numbers, right? Certainly, that's something I want to help you with in my work, but it can be painful. And even more importantly, in this conversation, the IRS, it just feels scary, right? And you feel kind of like you want to have your ducks in a row. You want to do everything right. You want to be a good citizen. You want to get it right. And the IRS, they can garnish your wages. They can lien your property. They can throw you in jail. So it feels like the stakes are really high. But I just want to come in with a little tax therapy for you for a moment and talk about why you just don't need to stress that hard. So yes, you have to get your documents together. Yes, you have to do it on time. So there's a basic bar you have to meet, but you don't have to go way, way over the top of it. As long as you meet the standard, the deadline, get your documents in, it's okay. You've done enough. And I want you to absorb that principle and actually take it with you over to your studio and to your business practices at times, because running a business is really freaking hard. It's really stressful, and good enough is good enough. It really is. Perfectionism makes you focus on the wrong things. Perfectionism in your artwork and your creative work, maybe it belongs a little bit more so over there, but you don't need to over apply it. It doesn't need to come into every element of your life. And places like taxes are a place where good enough is okay. Good enough is actually good enough. And I'm going to actually prove it to you. IRS has a mandate as a federal agency. And in the wording of the mandate, it says, I kid you not, the mandate of the IRS is to, and here's a quote, collect the substantially correct amount of tax. Listen to those words, substantially correct. Notice that it does not say the perfect to the dollar exact amount of correct tax. It doesn't say that. Substantially correct. What does that mean? That means if you calculate your mileage using this method or using this method, and it gives you a $40 difference on your taxes, does it matter? No. If you miss a deduction, if you, do a calculation one way or the other, and there's a small change in how the numbers come out and it's off by $20, $40, and your income is, $100,000, have you gotten your taxes substantially correct when it's off by $40? Yeah, it's substantially correct. So the IRS really actually does have an anti-perfectionist mandate. As funny as that seems, they don't want you stressing out over $20. They don't want that. What they want, what is so much more important to them, is that you meet the deadline. You get your taxes paid by April 15th. That is the tax payment deadline. It doesn't move. Can't get an extension for the payment deadline. It's always the 15th. You can get extension to file, so you can put in the paperwork by October 15th. But I do want you to remember, you can't get an extension to pay. The deadline is always April 15th. But the idea is get her done and move on. What the IRS cares about so much more is when things are substantially incorrect. And that means is something proportionately huge related to your income. Are you underreporting income? Okay, that could be a felony if it's over 25% understated. So, that matters, right? Like, report all your income, because that's the law, and that's really important. The IRS deeply cares about that one, but they don't care about this little $20 thing versus that little $20 thing, right? Another place where taxes really show you that perfectionism is not the goal is in estimates. So a lot of us, when you work for yourself and you make a substantial amount of income from self-employment, you have to pay your taxes not once a year, but quarterly. And this is called estimated quarterly taxes. And a lot of people, when they work for themselves for the first time, they get really tripped up around estimates. Now, I want to do a whole episode on estimated quarterly taxes because they're complicated and they really deserve a lot of space. And I want to give that one some spacious explanation. But just to touch on it right here, right now, the role of estimated quarterly taxes, it's important to understand the meaning behind why you are required to do that, because it helps you understand what you don't have to stress about. So Why? Why do we have to pay our taxes quarterly? Well, the reason is because when you work for yourself, whether you're a sole proprietor, single member LLC, self-employed person, freelancer, nobody's withholding tax for you, right? If you were an employee and you got your money on a paycheck, your employer would be mandated by law to be withholding your taxes every single pay period. So an employee generally is pretty well paid up with their taxes. Their Medicare and Social Security is always correctly withheld, almost always, because that amount is the same for every single person. So every single employer can do the calculation, right? Your employer can know exactly how much Medicare and Social Security to withhold. 7.65% out of your money, 7.65% out of their money. And you fill out a W-4 to tell your employer how much federal income tax to withhold out of your pay as well. And you can mess that up. You can get that wrong, right? Because that's based not just your employer doesn't know how much income tax, they don't know what income tax bracket you're in. You're actually not required to tell them. So you fill out a W-4 that says, like, withhold a lot, withhold a medium amount, withhold a very little amount. But basically, you have to have something withheld, some baseline. And so, sure, you may get it a little wrong. You may have way over withheld income from your paycheck, in which case you'll get a nice juicy refund. You may have under withheld, in which case you will actually owe a tax bill, and you'll probably want to submit a new W-4 to correct that and actually get more withheld from your paychecks ongoing. But essentially, even if the number is wrong, it's close. It's somewhere in the ballpark of what tax you actually owe. Whereas when we work for ourselves, we don't have anybody withholding tax, right? When I sell a painting through my gallery, they don't withhold any tax for me. They couldn't. They don't know my tax status, right? They don't know my tax situation, how much they should withhold. They don't know how high my expenses are, et cetera. It's on us to do the bookkeeping, to calculate our profit, which is our taxable number, when we work for ourselves. So we have a lot more admin to do. And I'm here for the support on that. So the thing is, estimated quarterly taxes, the role of estimates is basically to be prepaying our tax throughout the current tax year so that you pay as you go, so that you don't end up come April 15th with one big, ginormous full annual tax bill all at one time. This is really important because a full annual tax bill all at once is a lot of money, and a lot of taxpayers will not be able to pay a really high multi-thousand-dollar bill at one time without some massive planning. So this is the reason that the IRS does not leave it to chance. They actually mandate that you pay every quarter. Now, you can pay more than every quarter. You can pay monthly, you can pay weekly, you can pay at any frequency you want, but the minimum that quarterly taxes establish is that you need to pay at least once per quarter to avoid penalties and interest. And the penalties and interest just exist there as an incentive to say, yeah, you should do it. If you don't do it, we'll penalize you. That's the point of estimated quarterly taxes. And it's a really hard system to get your head around. I promise I will do a whole show on them so that you really have some of the baseline about how that works. But most people, when they start out and when they first have to pay quarterly taxes, they are so intimidated. And a lot of times what I see is that perfectionism just stops people from looking at all. It's like you have this feeling like, well, I'm not going to get it right, so I'm just going to not do anything. And you freeze. So perfectionism actually makes you do nothing. The only thing that will guarantee you pay penalties every quarter and interest every day, the interest is daily, is doing nothing. And so doing nothing is a really bad strategy. Whereas making a payment, so the funny thing about estimates is, listen to the word, right? Estimates. They're not called exactimates, right? Like, perfectionism is literally nowhere near that title. They are estimates because you cannot know the correct number. Why? Because estimates are prepaying for the current tax year. You don't even know what your taxes are going to be for the full year until the year is completely over. And yet you're required to make these payments throughout the year before the year has finished, right? So you cannot know what is going to happen to you tax-wise for the rest of the year. And that's okay. The government is not going to legally compel you to have a crystal ball and be able to accurately predict the future. There's the good news, right? That wouldn't be fair, and they don't do it. which is why they let you do an estimate. There are some guidelines they do have, and I will talk about those in this future episode. But I do want to just say, like, that word estimate, I just want to remind you how imperfect it is. Estimated quarterly taxes are a place where simply meeting the deadline every quarter and paying something is going to prevent 4 penalties from building up on next year's tax return and save you money, even if you get it very wrong. So an attempt that is radically off is still better than freezing and doing nothing, letting perfectionism completely stop you. All right. So to review, perfectionism, if it belongs anywhere at all, it belongs only in your creative work, right? Keep it there, keep it where it matters. And even there, do you really need it? I'm not so sure. But perfectionism does not need to exist in every area of your life. Don't over apply it. It will only drive you crazy, right? It will keep you in anxiety and stress and working way too hard on stuff you really don't have to. IRS's motto is practically get her done. I mean, not quite, but that's what that deadline is. Many people submit some pretty imperfect tax returns on April 14th, and that's okay. You can always correct it with an amended return. I just want to remind you to keep your focus in the right place, right? I think a lot of times we don't feel as valued as we should as creative people. But I am here to tell you that the world needs you. The world needs that amazing work you're doing. And I don't want you to be stressed out about taxes, about estimates in ways that aren't helpful to you, to the IRS, to anybody, right? That are just distracting anxiety pits. So the world needs you to write that song that's going to uplift somebody's spirits. The world needs you to write that play that is going to give thousands of people an incredible new perspective on some element of the world they've never considered before. The world needs you to write that book. The world needs you to make the branding on that new Latina-owned business who has this incredible vision. They need you to make that branding sparkle so that that business can fly, right? The work you're doing is so good for this world, and we need more of it. So let's not waste your time on the wrong things. All right. Thanks for listening, my friends. If this podcast felt meaningful to you, would you do me a favor and subscribe, take a minute to rate and review it, and share it with a friend who needs it? It is so hard to start a podcast. It is so difficult to start with teeny tiny numbers and not be sure if anybody's listening or if this matters. So if it does, would you show me? It would be so helpful. And I'm so grateful to you. Thank you for doing the incredible work that you do in the world. Let's stay focused on the big stuff because the world needs you. Thanks for listening. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review. It really helps, and share it with a friend. I'm so grateful. This podcast is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links we reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.